Is it possible to get rich in less than a year?
Anyone can be rich in a moment.
People on social media talk about get rich quick schemes. This is very precise and it does require work.
That's an issue. It often requires risk. It often has too much grind.
Hustle culture is very much about work without a specific direction.
That's not the normal process, and it's not what people actually think.
You're just expected to get out of being a miser when suddenly it's time for retirement and enjoy life.
It creates an unnecessary amount of pain.
I think that a lot of people are starting in debt, right?
That's going to be tough to get, rich in 1 year.
How do they get out of that hole? Okay, Garrett, I've been seeing a lot of videos about this. People on social media talk about get rich quick schemes. Is it possible to get rich in less than a year?
Well, I've done it in less than a year. Yes. I've helped people do it in less than a year. Absolutely. That's not the normal process. And it's not what people actually think. See, a lot of people, they would actually destroy the enjoyment trying to get there in 1 year. And they would take far too much risk and miss out on so much of life that it creates an unnecessary amount of pain. And that pain can actually prevent them from being more creative, from actually having a bigger picture. It can become very short-sighted. But I'll tell you what, there are 5 levers that will help you get there. And there are 3 to 4 income generators that if you pick 1 or 2, can help you shorten the path. And you know what? If you already are rich in relationships and you have great skill sets, it's easy. If you're not, you might want to reframe how long it's going to take.
Awesome. Okay, well, let's start first with who's someone that you know that's gotten there. Have you met anybody who's done this in a year?
Yeah, let's rewind. The year is 2005. It was in April. And we had this event called the Curriculum for Wealth. One of my clients, his name's Jeff. He brought his son, Dale. And Dale was an engineer, and he hated his job. And he was
as a lot of engineers do.
Very frugal. Some might call it cheap. Behind his back, frugal to his face. But he had like $100K that was sitting in a 401k. Okay. He had a salary. He pretty much had like almost no loans, maybe a little bit on a home. And he wasn't even close to financially independent because basically he traded his time for money.
Do you know about what his salary was?
His salary. I think it was somewhere around 150K.
Okay.
Didn't travel, always looked at ways to cut expenses, saved money in this 401k, was very young, had very young kids at the time, was able to pretty much pay everything off, not really have any loans, but at the same time, not have any cash flow that was coming in if he didn't go to work. And he hated the smell of the airplane fuel that would burn as they were designing the engines and testing everything out. So his wife said he was obsessed with money and always talked about budgeting and what they could do to cut back and what they could eliminate. They bought all the gifts for their kids from Goodwill. And even though they had a bunch of kids, they spent less than $5 on Christmas because in his mind, it was all, what can you save? What can I save? But here's the thing. You can't save yourself rich.
Yeah. And what was his purpose? Was he trying to save himself so he could get enough money to get out of that? So he could become a millionaire in that millionaire next door type of path, that wealthy barber type of path, that, every Dave Ramsey type of path, like all of those kind of things was about scrimp, save, sacrifice, delay, defer. It was a notion that wealth was just how much money could he save because he believed it took money to make money. How much risk was he willing to take? And he was pretty fiscally conservative. So he didn't really like to take risk. He had a very diversified portfolio and he just was a little nervous about things. And how long can you wait? So, hey, he just figured if he was patient enough, he'd started early enough because when I met him, he was in his early 30s, he's like, he'll be fine. But the reality was this is a 30-year proposition at best. And there's no training along the way for cash flow. There's no way to get rich in 1 year at all using that methodology. It is a accumulate slowly. And even if someone has $1 million in an account,
they are usually afraid of paying the taxes because it's usually deferred and delayed taxes,
Yeah.
like his 401k was. They aren't trained in how to create cash flow in a consistent way when interest rates fluctuate, or how to deal with inflation when it comes roaring in, or what to do if taxes go up because they've deferred all their tax and there isn't any more write-offs because in retirement, his kids are all grown up,
Yeah.
and out of the house, and they're no longer a write-off, and he wasn't a business owner. So we did this entire day event, right?
And also, like, you're a miser for your whole life, and then you're just expected to get out of being a miser when suddenly it's time for retirement and figure out how to enjoy life.
So we did this curriculum for wealth event.
Uh-huh.
And it was, how do you create financial independence? And the goal was in 10 years or less. That was the goal.
Yeah.
Okay. So he showed up at 12:30 because that's when we started, because there were people come from my hometown. I wanted to give them drive time.
Mm-hmm.
And then we were going to go to like 8:30. Right. And we're going to provide a meal for free because his dad bought the ticket. And that's what got him there. It's like, oh, there's a free meal. His dad had been trying to get. And so we really talked about this formula. And the formula was, let's forget about wealth being a function of how much money you could put in, how much risk you could take, and how long you can wait. And let's instead make it about velocity. So velocity is GDP, or the output, gross domestic product, divided by the money supply. So how do we keep the money supply fixed and increase the output? Well, I already mentioned the 4 I's. If you could save from the IRS, or if you could save on interest, or on investments, or on insurance, then what can happen is you're going to have more output. Keeping this fixed, it means that you've increased your velocity. There's more cash flow. But the other thing was, that's not going to get you rich in 1 year. It's going to help. But the thing is, you have to do something completely different than what most people think of when they think of live within your means. You have to expand your means. You have to know your investor DNA, and you have to do a few things. One, you have to make more money.
Mm-hmm.
So for him, he's like, how's he going to make more money? That was a question he was thinking throughout the day. We know you want to keep more of the money you make. That's through the 4 I's to efficiency. Then you've got to grow your money. And ultimately, what he was learning this day is you got to grow yourself. You got to learn to be a steward over these. You got to learn the models and frameworks and have financial intelligence. And so Dell came up to me at the end of the day and he said, here's the deal. He says, I'm going to get there in 365 days and become financially independent. And I was like, well, how? He's like, well, with my attention to detail, I think I could go in and I could buy some real estate. He's like, I've got a good salary. That was an asset for him. He's got no debt, right? But he had paid off his cars and all that kind of stuff. He had $100K that was in his 401k, which he had access to $50K of that he could borrow if he wanted to. So he's like, well, I think I've got some money for down payments. I've got salary, which will help me get loans. And he says, I'm going to go out and I'm going to analyze and buy real estate. So he bought single family, real estate or duplexes in the area that he lived, which he knew the area. He could look at the spreadsheets, and he just went out there and he decided he would take 20 hours a week above and beyond what he's doing in his job to buy this real estate. Okay. Now, he also convinced his family, because he's a Utah boy, to live off their food storage. So he's going to lower the expenses so you could have more money for,
Building
real estate and building the assets. So the nice thing is, because he was so frugal, the bar wasn't terribly high on what he needed to have.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But he really didn't want to work in the job that he worked. And by the way, he got there in 362 days. He just bought real estate, which was very tax efficient, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so he used his 401k. He borrowed from that. He also partnered with Jeff, his father, right? And so he was able to get enough cash flow from his real estate to cover 100% of his expenses, and did that in less than 1 year. So you've got to pick your growth engine. For me,
interesting. Yeah.
My growth engine is, all right, I've got these 3 books that have got this intellectual property. And so if I want to do this in 1 year, I'm going to get that through webinars with all my existing relationship capital, because I'm going to say, who do I know that already knows me? So who do I know that I can create value for.
Mm-hmm.
And so every single week I'd be doing a webinar. That's the relationship capital piece. What do I know? What do I know that other people don't? Well, I know how to save taxes for people. I know how to get them financially independent and give them the modalities and models and even the financial team, because I've got a lot of those relationships. So again, I could go out there, and this is what I did. July 3rd of 2024, I launched Multiplier. And then, we're basically a year later had $50,000 a month coming in recurring revenue.
Mm-hmm.
Now there's expenses against that, but in 1 year, right? That's a pretty good recurring revenue, because I looked at the relationship capital and mental capital that I had, and I had the right model to launch that. So Dell did it in real estate, even though he started with very little. So if someone has nothing, the thing is, if you have nothing, meaning you don't have a job right now, you don't have any salary, you don't own a business, like 1 year is an unrealistic expectation unless you have some brilliant mind where you could build something in technology that could be acquired immediately because of how quickly you could build that. We've seen that happen with, savants and people that are just brilliant that way. But for the person that doesn't have this extraordinary skill set, well, you're going to have to pick, what is your income driver? What's the generator, right? And go all in and focus there. That's going to be the key. And part of what you're going to look at is what's your mental capital and what's your relationship capital, because it doesn't take money to make money. It takes relationships and ideas. It takes value and it takes exchange.
And are there any other components to finding that growth engine, or is that really the key, the relationship capital, mental capital?
Man, I mean, the thing is, if you have the right relationship capital for the right person, they can make a ton very quickly, because if you have the right network and you can connect people, there's ways that you've just seen, catalysts and people that can bring people together. Like this guy didn't invent the stint, but got the distribution for the stint, was worth hundreds of millions of dollars just for getting the distribution network to the person who invented it. That was a story that one of my mentors told me. I'm like, wow, that's the right relationships. But, if you're starting out in a brand new city with nothing, and you don't have those relationships, then I think back to my story. Like, I was still in college, but I started to go to events to learn more in my field. And then I just went up and talked to people, and someone's like, man, I'm going to introduce you to the general agent. I think you should come speak at our agency, because I had read one article, was talking about it, and like, that's fascinating. And so I studied, went and spoke, and then all of a sudden everybody wanted to do joint work with me. I was young, but I was just learning. You've got to figure the skill. Like, where can you add massive value because of the things that you want to learn, the things that you're willing to study, the things that you have a natural proclivity and ways that you can accelerate that learning. If you find that skill, then you become invaluable to someone. You become of value to someone. So don't just look that you want to get rich. Think, how can I build enough value that the natural byproduct is that I become wealthy? So Dale developed that skill in real estate. Right. And by developing that skill, he got there in less than 1 year. I've had other people that have gotten there in less than 1 year. Chris, Ben, are two other people that got there in less than 1 year. But
what are some examples of ways that they did it? Was it outside of real estate?
Yeah, well, let me use one I know I can use. So we have this guy, Pete.
Yeah.
He joins our program back when it was called the Freedom Fast Track. And he was, going to launch his business, but it was pretty new. And his business then got really big. And he wasn't perfectly a candidate, but I knew him personally. So he came in, and guess what? It took him 17 months to become financially independent. And his entire strategy was Airbnb in the area that he lived. And so I think in 17 months, he was like 85% financially independent. But here's what's cool. His business went from 6 figures to 8 figures that next 12 months. Because now he had the financial house in order, and he had the cash flow to cover the basic expenses for the most part. Everything could be reinvested into growing that business.
Yeah.
And it grew big. I mean, I ended up joining the program that he created. I started seeing him on all these amazing stages. And so he was able to move very quickly because he had a skill set on how people could acquire stages. So speakers that want to get on stage, he was really good at helping them do that.
Yeah.
And he had this financial independence that he had created, with just doing Airbnbs in the area that it was in, which he knew and already understood. And then he really grew his business substantially because he had a very unique knowledge. And then he built the relationships quickly, and those relationships helped to expand it. And he wasn't constrained by just survival.
He wasn't constrained by just, handle. So that's another story.
And I also imagine that because he was financially independent, he had more mental space to, come up with new ideas and innovations for his company.
Well, let me talk about Chris. So Chris, I think he got there pretty quickly as well. Less than a year.
Okay.
And part of it was because he had a very thriving, chiropractic office.
Mm-hmm.
As a doctor. And, he's like, well, should I open up a second location? And then should I end up opening up like a third down the road or a fourth? But the reality was he was already like, at capacity.
Yeah.
And so how was he going to do this? And is it what he really wanted? It wasn't really what he wanted. He just thought that was the only model to make more money.
Mm.
And so instead, over the next year, we created two things. Number one, a shadowing program called the Zano Experience. And number two, basically, he created all of the people that mentored him.
Mm-hmm.
All these mentors, he interviewed them and created and launched like a program that showed other people how he did what he did.
Oh,
and
gotcha.
So he was able to create a whole bunch of cash flow from these two things that didn't require hiring a bunch of people. It didn't require, he had Tabor who helped him with the kind of like the, mentors program. And then he had his wife that helped him with the Zano Experience. And, this was like $7,500. And, this was some monthly amount that people were paying. But ultimately, he just took everything he was doing and said, I have the largest volume chiropractic office in the nation. Want to see how I do it. So he went instead of B2C, like where he was, he said, let me make a B2B move.
Yeah.
And it was like, these were really IP strategies. Those IP strategies allowed for, a good middle six-figure amount of cash to come in without having to acquire another office, which could take a lot of time. Now you have to locate the other space. You have to hire the team. You have to create the marketing. So this was like already there and lower hanging fruit, much easier and much more enjoyable for him.
Well, and what's interesting is it's, hustle culture is very much about like work, but it kind of seems like it's working and without a specific direction. Versus this is very, precise, and it does require work, but it's I don't know, that there's something different about it.
So the question is, if you want more, is why? Next question is, what is rich? We say get rich in 1 year.
Yeah.
What does it mean? Does it mean that you're living a great life? Does it mean that you're a millionaire? Does it mean that you're financially independent?
Yeah.
I mean, like, you have to kind of define what that is.
True, because it's like you could create a Ponzi scheme and get rich in 1 year and then end up in prison.
And then go to jail, which is deservedly what would happen in that situation.
Yeah.
Because yes, let's there are people that could basically, use other people's money. But you're going to get rich in 1 year doing that. Sometimes that's cutting corners. Sometimes that's taking on too much risk.
Gotcha.
And so, yes, can it be done? Yes. But I mean, a lot of people that are raising money aren't as good with all the details of what needs to happen for a project to be happening.
Gotcha.
And so
they're more like sales. They know how to, they don't know how to get the money.
So if you're raising money to launch a venture that you think is going to be really profitable in 1 year, like that's a lot of money that usually to build that infrastructure that fast. But if we look at maybe like more like crowdsourcing, right, where you could launch a product or something and get the money from the end user, there's a lot of stories of people that did that.
Yeah.
That basically raised the funds through crowdsourcing, raised more than they anticipated, built the product or the program or the movie. Like, there's so many different things. That just requires a very high level of integrity and commitment, because you're taking on funds that you're going to produce something and you're getting the funds before it's actually produced. So you got to make sure, do you have the team and the wherewithal and the infrastructure and the willingness and the resourcefulness and the resilience to make something like that happen?
If someone's starting from scratch, like they're in debt, what's the fastest path?
Scratch or in debt? That's the question. Scratch is zero.
Okay, that's true.
Yeah, they might be like, student loan here or something. And in the negative.
Well, okay, with student loan, I think that a lot of people are starting in debt, right?
Yeah.
So what's the fastest way to financial independence or financial freedom? Like, how do they get out of that hole?
All right. So first off, we got to talk about how they're not going to get there.
Okay.
Right. Because, there's going to be people out there say, oh, you got to invest in a Roth. Well, that's going to be tough to get, rich in 1 year on a Roth. Although there are some people that might do like a fix and flip with real estate, or they might do a small escrow payment to secure a property and then have all that gain tax-free inside of a Roth. So that would be interesting. But like just doing what a lot of people talk about with dollar cost averaging, that's, the market's going up and down and you just keep buying every month no matter what. So you're buying at an average share price. That's not going to get you there, right? Set it and forget it. That whole notion of like compound interest sucks for that first year. Like it's anemic.
Gotcha.
Right?
So that's like a 30, 40 year
big
plan.
30-year proposition,
Yeah.
right? If you're going to use compound interest where you get that hockey stick in that last 10 years. So that's also not something that's going to do it. Just paying off loans. Like, so that's not going to do it for someone, right? Like, hey, like all of the traditional conventional advice is not helping people get rich in 1 year. And a lot of people won't get rich in 1 year for a few reasons.
Okay.
Because it requires the work. It requires doing work.
Okay.
Now, okay, here's one way you do it. You can marry into it. That's work.
Yeah.
Like kind of have someone with a bunch of money fall in love with you. You could win the lottery, but that's like near zero chance, right? I mean, it's basically like people donating money. That's what's going on with the lottery. Like the chances are they're just so small. So you can inherit it, right? So obviously, if you have someone that's in your family that's going to die and you're going to inherit money, like those are things that, are obviously, I have a friend that says, well, you could just as easily fall in love with someone who's rich, but that's, or inherit, like that's kind of a lucky sperm club type of thing.
Yeah.
And lottery is just, again, it's an ignorance tax. It's not going to happen. So it requires work. And so really there's these 5 levers that I use in order to get there. And then we're going to talk about like how you get there in 1 year. The first one is you got to plug financial leaks. So I'm assuming someone has some type of income. So if someone's a business owner, they're going to have a much higher chance of getting there than someone that's not a business owner, first and foremost.
Because it's dependent on you finding a new job or things like that.
Right.
Yeah.
And like job has like, if you're amazing, like at AI, there's some jobs starting out at $100 million, so you got to have extraordinary talent and then you might be able to get there. But plugging financial leaks, there's 4 I's to do that, which is basically a lot of people tip the government. So let's get money back from the IRS. They overpay on interest because they don't negotiate the best interest rates. They don't restructure their loans properly, or they don't reallocate underperforming funds to pay off higher interest rate loans, or just investments. A lot of investments, they're just a lot of non-performing fees. Like if you have a retirement plan, there might be legal fees and admin fees, 12B1 fees, which are marketing fees for the fund, expense ratios. You got to say, is it actually worth it versus like an index fund or an ETF? And then there's insurance. Just proper design on insurance can mean you have more money in your pocket. So usually these are like 10% or more of someone's income. And so that's the fuel that can help with this, is you plug financial leaks and you find that fuel. The second is you've got to kind of know what you're going for. So you got to engineer the wealth. So the way that we're going to engineer is we're going to find out what's your monthly nut, basically, right? What's the amount of money
what do we have to
come
cover
in every month? I just watched South Park, so the monthly nut was on that episode. But like, what do you need coming in? So that's got to find out your economic independence number. What amount of cash flow would have to come in to cover your basic expenses? Then you got to work on coordinating things. So if you can coordinate things, you can stop leaking as well, right? Just if someone has a bunch of money in savings, but have low deductibles, you can raise deductibles because you have the cash to handle if there's an incident, and that could lower your premiums. That's more money in your pocket. So just simply coordinating things, adding an umbrella policy to a car and a home might mean that the umbrella could do more heavy lifting and lower the payment you'd have towards liability coverage than just trying to handle on your car and home individually. So those are examples of coordination, right? And even setting up the right corporation, how you pay yourself, that's a big part of coordinating, because you can move from active to passive income and lower taxes that way, or
have ordinary income, move to capital gains and lower taxes that way. Or there are some tax-free things when you're selling, or just even using tax arbitrage where you spend $1, you get more than $1 back. But these are all kind of coordinated type of strategies. So then we got to look at like investor DNA, right? So what is your investor DNA? Because this is going to be really key to figure out how you're going to get there. And so investor DNA is, what are you going to invest in? And more importantly, what are you not going to invest in? So you have to eliminate and focus. So when you know your investor DNA, it's probably, if you're going to get rich in 1 year, it's really got to be, one of three things for the most part, maybe a fourth. The first one is, for some, it could be real estate. Is it, are you good at real estate? Do you enjoy real estate? Do you have background in real estate? Do you know what you're doing there? If not, that's not going to be right for you. And it takes a little bit of time. Second one is business, right? Maybe you start a business, maybe you acquire a business. My buddy Walker Dybo was texting me earlier today, and in his book, Buy Then Build, he's talking about you can pretty much buy a business for the same down payment that you'd have on a house. So there are ways for people to buy businesses. They just don't think about it. The third is intellectual property. Often this takes longer than 1 year, but there are ways through our process of the cycle of creation and through the pre-sale where you can start making money before you even have the product done. We've seen this with crowdsourcing like Indiegogo and those types of companies. And then fourth, just Bitcoin. There's a lot of people that are, that have liquidity or they borrow against things to buy Bitcoin. And we've seen Bitcoin have this meteoric rise. It's outperformed every other asset since it's been out. So, we've got to figure out what your investor DNA is. And you basically pick one of these, no more than two.
Yeah.
Right. And that's going to be the focus. And then the third thing is we've got to accelerate investment income. So we've got to accelerate investment income. So do you have a lazy asset? Like a lazy asset would be something that it just isn't providing any cash flow. And we want to turn that lazy asset into a cash flowing asset, because if you're financially independent, that's pretty rich right there. Like it means that you have choice in what you do every day, and every active dollar you earn can build more assets, which is going to be exponential growth. So you got to have, you got to find those lazy assets. And then, the next thing we want to do is we just want to create cash flow with those, right? We want to basically reallocate to something that will create cash flow. And if you do that, that's going to help you on this path. And then, the fourth thing is going to be around scale. So if someone already has a business, are they going to invest in people, processes, or procedure that allow them to scale or to grow? For example, here's a good growth engine. We'll put money into selling, what would the Rockefellers do, right? And then we get back the money that we put in, and that generates leads that then we can follow up with. In the past, we used to sell those to insurance advisors. Now we're creating an insurance agency. And so we can now, make money on the book, sell courses, and then actually provide the Rockefeller method with the right attorneys and the right agents that we have in our ecoverse. And so we have a growth engine. If we could put in $1, get more than $1 back, then we can just keep that going and scale until it's no longer efficient that way. But that's an example of scale. That's an IP example. But ultimately, another way could be, what I do all the time is I do these webinars where people that are clients have a database, and then they interview me. And then I just did one yesterday. And then we offer my book bundle for $44.90.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden that generates a bunch of leads, or there's plenty of ways to scale. People, processes, or procedures. Is there AI that can help you scale? Is there technology? Is there hiring the right individual that ultimately can allow you to have a 50% growth year in a business? Because when you're a small business, that's a lot easier than a large business. So what is the thing that you could tweak that would actually make the biggest difference? Because it's either freeing up your time, allowing you to do the things that no one else can do, and ultimately make that money. And the fifth thing is just really making sure that you make it count. It's about creating a life you don't want to retire from. It's about designing a life that you love. It's about making sure that you are playing the game that you've already won, that you're like, this is what I want to do because it feeds me. It gives me energy. I'm committed to it. So make it count means you have a vision. It means that you get to enjoy your life along the way. It means that you take care of your health. It means that you have quality of life, right? These are all the things that matter because you're your greatest asset, not a stock, bond, or piece of real estate. So if you have the energy, if you have the zeal, if you have the passion, then you can see it through. So it's plug your financial leaks. It's then engineer wealth. It's then accelerate investment income. It's then scale business revenue, and then finally make it count. And look, here's the thing. It's possible to get rich in 1 year, but we have to think is where does someone start from?
Mm-hmm.
You know, if someone's deep in debt and they're trying to get here and this is what they consider rich, 1 year might be a lot of pressure and constraint. And it just might create a lot of pain.
Yeah.
Because it's this artificial deadline.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Dell was able to do it because he had good income. He had an asset that he could tap into for down payments.
Yeah.
He had an engineer's mind and he knew how to analyze deals. He knew the area where he was buying and acquiring the property. He's willing to spend the extra 20 hours a week. You know, they lived off food storage to keep the expenses low. Like, that's a pretty tough thing to do in 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
For me to do what I did with Multiplier in 1 year, to have $50,000 recurring revenue from it, well, I already had a lot of mental capital.
Yeah.
You know, I'd already built a lot of courses, created a lot of content. I already had a decent amount of relationship capital where people could do webinars, or I could be promoted, or I could go speak on someone's stage. So, you know, it's not like I'm starting at zero.
Mm-hmm.
We always have our mental capital. We always have our relationship capital. And those with the most mental and relationship capital, hey, they might be able to do it in 1 month. But what they define rich as and what someone else might be a completely different thing. So let's just review. You've got to have your generator. You know, what's going to be the income generator for you? What's going to be what creates cash flow? What's going to be what helps you to, you know, fuel everything that you're up to?
Yeah.
And so for me, you know, when I started last year, I said, okay, I'm going to do these cash cabins where people come sit at this table with me because that's $30K. And, you know, that gives me a little bit of an infusion that I could then build the infrastructure for Multiplier, right? So I had a brand. I had certain assets, already had written 10 books that can help me to do some of those things. So I guess, you know, it just depends on where you actually starting from versus where you're going. If you've never owned a business and you acquire your first business, it might take a while for that to even break even, let alone be to get rich, you know, because it might be an SBA loan that could take 6 months just to acquire the loan to get the thing done, right? It might be that you build something, you get paid after the fact. And so, you know, I think part of it is we have to be careful of the get rich quick mindset.
Yeah.
That's an issue because it often requires risk. It often has too much grind. It often has short-sightedness, you know, and that could be an issue. So think about getting rich right. How do we get rich right? Well, we use the 5 levers for one, right?
Yeah.
So plug financial leaks, engineer your wealth, you know, accelerate investment income, scale your business revenue, make it count. Definitely. But you build relationships. You invest in yourself and team. You learn to focus and say no to things so that you can really stay on track with what you're doing. You build a powerful stream of income before you build multiple streams of income.
Yeah.
You know?
And what's cool is like whether it ends up being in a year or in 3 years, it's still the same foundational points.
Look, I think anyone can do it in 10 years or less.
Yeah.
If they live in a developed country, right? If you live in a communist country, what are you going to do? Like you get punished for being too productive. If you live in a third world country, you know, if you don't have the ability to take payment or there's not a banking system, there's certain infrastructure that has to exist for this to happen. But here's the real deal. Anyone can be rich in a moment if it's about enjoying what you have, being appreciative for what you've got, feeling a level of gratitude, recognizing the people in your life, what you know, the opportunities that you have, the lessons that you've learned. It's that mindset where you put value first, where money's not the primary reason or excuse you would do or not do something. That is financial freedom. And that's a mindset that can happen in a moment. It's a state of being in a perspective. But what most people are talking about is how do I have enough money? But the problem is if it's only about more, that's always elusive. It's always in the future. It's no matter how much you get, someone else has more, so you keep going for it. So that's why I say find the win in the work. Fall in love with the process. You know, enjoy the journey.
Yeah.
Be grateful along the way. Like I was talking to you about this. I was like, hey man, 3 relationships that I've had that have been less than ideal and very frustrating have at moments made me forget about I have this great wife and amazing kids and great friends and places I love to go. And, you know, I'm a multimillionaire with a 6-pack. That's pretty effing rare. You know what I'm saying? Like, cause I see those Instagram hits me up with that, you know, it's like I overcame kidney disease. I have so much to be grateful for, but sometimes If we're only focused on getting rich, we lose the gratitude and the enjoyment in the process. So don't get addicted to the outcomes. Get the enjoyment and fulfillment from the process. That's the game changer.